Hey guys, this is Patrick from STH, and this is the HP EliteDesk 805 G6 Mini. And this might just be my favorite Project Tiny Mini Micro node right now. Now, you might not know what Project Tiny Mini Micro is, and if you haven't been following the series on STH, Project Tiny Mini Micro stands for Lenovo Tiny, Mini is the HP Mini, and then Micro is Dell's 1-liter PCs. And we are taking a look at dozens of these systems, and this one right here might actually be my favorite in terms of power consumption, performance, and just overall expandability. And we're gonna talk about why in a little bit. But with that said, I do think that I would much prefer to have the G8 version of this. We have two of them on order. They've been on order for well over a month now, and HP is doing something so dastardly that it makes me kind of cringe to even recommend HP at this point. We're gonna get to that during story time. And what we're gonna do first is we're gonna start at the front of the unit, but I do wanna address one thing really quick, which is really the numbering. Now, the new HP EliteDesk Minis, they're actually turning into the Elite Minis. There's no longer gonna be Desk, and there's also gonna be a Pro Mini instead of Pro Desk Mini. And so HP is changing that with the G9 generation. We covered this on the STH main site. Those systems with Alder Lake, Intel Alder Lake are gonna start coming out, I think in March, but that is just something that is being changed in terms of the brand. Now this is an Elite Desk, and so basically in HP's hierarchy, it basically goes Pro Desk, and then Elite Desk is better than Pro Desk. And then it's basically numerical based on the hundreds digit. So a Pro Desk or EliteDesk 400, that would be a lower end model, whereas the 800 model, that is definitely the higher end model. That's pretty much like the highest end model you can get. And what that practically means is that the Intel version of this is the EliteDesk 800 G6, and we've already looked at that. And that would be the Intel version, while this is the 805 G6. The 5 basically tells us that this is an AMD-based system. But the significance of this being an 800 system instead of something lower like the 400 or 700 or something like that is the fact that this is designed to be a top-end system. We recently did the Lenovo M75Q Gen 2 Tiny system, and that is also AMD Ryzen based, and we looked at both the Ryzen 4000 and 5000 series in that, but that's the 75, it's not the 90 or 95. So it is lower than the equivalent top-end Intel units. So while Lenovo doesn't necessarily make the Ryzen a top-end solution, HP actually does, and this makes this system absolutely awesome. Okay, now let's get to the hardware and let's start with the front of the chassis. Now you're gonna see a couple of features here that are definitely, I guess, awesome in terms of what HP is offering. Specifically, let's talk about the USB. Now we get a total of 3 USB ports. We get 2 Type A ports and 1 Type C port. These are all Gen 2, which means that they are 10 gigabit per second ports. We have seen a couple systems with the brand new 2x2 port, but on the other hand, the fact that this has 10 gigabit per second ports is not using any 5 gig on the front, and we get 3 of them is definitely a step up from some of the other ones where you only get say 2 ports. Now something we don't get, and then we've seen on some of the other units, is that some of the other units actually have 2 headset jacks, or they'll have a line out and a headset jack. This only has 1 audio jack, which is the combo headset jack. And frankly, I think on a system like this, I think that's okay, but there are gonna be people that say, hey, I would rather have another output and I don't wanna use USB. And so if you're one of those people, then maybe that's not ideal. But overall, I really like the fact that we do on the front get 3 USB and 1 audio jack. I'd much prefer that versus the 2 USB, 2 audio jack solution. Now, when we move to the back of the unit, we get 2 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, and then we get an interesting USB configuration. And here's just kind of one thing I wish that HP did. So you get a total of 4 USB Type A ports, but the one that's on the left and on the right of the chassis, those are both 10 gigabit per second ports, so they're Gen 2 ports, whereas the 2 that are stacked on top of one another, those are 5 gigabit per second Gen 1 ports. All I want to say here is, as bad as USB 3 naming is, I really wish that we would just have HP go put a little 10 next to the 10 gigabit per second ports. They should do it on all the ports, so that way we know which ones are 10 gigabit and which ones are 5 gigabit. Also, we actually have a 1 gigabit Ethernet port, and that is okay, but it's not necessarily as good as if we had 2.5 gig Ethernet on this. We really wish that these vendors started doing a little bit higher speed networking, especially for wired in this generation. Now, you're gonna notice that we have another USB port, but we're gonna actually go to this blank slot up here first. Now, this blank slot is really for if you have a DGPU or discrete GPU. HP actually offers a NVIDIA GTX 1660 Ti, which I think is like a 6GB card that you can actually get in a little system like this. And it's not a full desktop version, that's more the mobile version that they put in something like this, just because otherwise thermals would be kind of crazy. But in this slot, if you don't get the DGPU, you can get things like 2 USB ports, you can get serial ports. There are other options that you can use there. And this is much more expandable than what you see, especially on the Dell side. And that slot is actually called the FlexPort 2 slot, but the FlexPort 1 slot, we actually have something in. Now in this little slot right here, what we actually get is another USB Type-C port with also display port, as an alt mode. Now this is a configurable option, and we did get that with this system. And there's a little story behind that. But before we get to that story, just real quick, you can actually get other things here. You can get an HDMI port, you can get a display port, you can get a whole bunch of different things to actually go in this slot here, and this is very flexible. Now this is actually called the FlexIO, but it's not just any FlexIO, it's FlexIO V2. And one of the really small innovations that you're gonna see when we get inside the chassis, but we'll just talk about it now, is that this little FlexIO V2 no longer needs an extra little power cable for USB-C or for the USB-C module. So this is the FlexIO V1 version of it, and you actually need this little cable. You don't need that on the V2 one. But why this is super interesting is actually because, well, this has a little story to it. And specifically, Jose, who is one of the folks that actually, I guess, reads STH and watches this on YouTube, he's definitely commented on some of the YouTube videos. I actually purchased this system from Jose via eBay, and he actually gave me the option. He said, well, do you want this or do you want the network port? And I was like, well, it's kind of hard because I review these things on YouTube. And he's like, wait, are you Patrick from Serve the Home? And I'm like, yes, this is Patrick from Serve the Home. And he's like, oh my gosh. And so what we ended up doing was he sent both the network port and then also he sent the USB-C version, but he kept the 8GB of memory because I knew I was going to put 232 gigs in this anyway. And so we kind of did a little swap there. So Jose, if you're watching this, thank you. And that fateful event of getting that network card led us down the path of actually trying to put that network card into this, and it did not work because apparently that network card actually was a V1, not a FlexIO V2 module. And so we actually put that in the HP, I guess the 405 G4 Mini, and it worked no problem. And we're gonna have that in that video if that hasn't been posted by the time this one has. Allegedly, you're supposed to be able to get a 2.5 gig Intel NIC in this, but I'm not really sure of the status of it because it's one of those things that you can still order on the website for HP. You can also see it if you go look on the spec sheet, but at the same time, I actually tried ordering that 2.5 gig Ethernet NIC on the 805 G8 minis, and the two that I ordered, both orders, I got a note back from HP's support staff saying, hey, if you continue to have this as an option, we won't be able to build it, and we won't be able to build it, which means your order is going to get canceled. So do you want to remove it? We'll give you a $40 credit. So I don't really know what the status is of that 2.5 gig Ethernet port. I mean, it's definitely, it's not on the FlexIO V2 PDF, so we couldn't find it there, but it is on the configurator and it is on the spec sheet, and we haven't been able to find one. So I don't really know what to tell you there other than it would be super cool if it was available. I'm a little bit worried though that maybe HP used one of the older i225 NICs from Intel, the ones that didn't necessarily have the best stability, and therefore they said, oh, well, now that there's a new rev, a Rev 3, we can't use any of the older revs, and so we made all these things, we can't use them anymore. I don't exactly know what's going on. Maybe that's what happened, who knows? But at the end of the day, it would be super cool if they had it, but we can't get it in this. Hey guys, it's me from the future. Guess what? It's actually now a couple weeks later, it's actually March, and we finally got the 805 G8 Mini that we ordered. And not only did we get the 2.5 gig Ethernet thing that the HP order support folks have said that we couldn't get, but we also got a refund and we still got the NIC. So I have absolutely no idea, but apparently they can make them, although we only got one of the 2 units and the parts that we actually ordered are back ordered, so who knows? Okay, that was story time, but now let's get back to the hardware, and specifically just before we get inside, I wanted to show you the top of this case. This actually has a ventilated top to the case, and you can definitely see where you have all the extra airflow because you definitely need it. This has a lot more capability than some of the older generations. But the downside of something like this is also that if you wanted to stack these one on top of another, you would be restricting airflow to the fans that are in here. And because you are basically cutting off that airflow, well, that basically means that you wouldn't get as good at cooling, and you do have to worry about overheating in systems like these, especially if you get one of these with the DGPU. I'd be very, very scared to actually go and start stacking these things on top of one another if you had that. Now, basically getting inside the system is super easy. There's a little screw and you basically just unscrew it, and it's actually kept inside and it's retained inside the chassis, which is super nice. But then once you get that done, you're basically inside. And this is HP's fairly typical layout that they've had for several generations now. We basically have the CPU up top with the memory, and then we have all of our storage and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff below. Lenovo has things on both sides, but this is kind of a little bit more straightforward than what Lenovo does. I do like Lenovo's design a lot, but I think this is super expandable, which is why I like it a little bit better these days. Now, first off, let's get to the memory. And the memory is actually below the main CPU fan, and that's kind of been standard on, I don't know, HP units for generations. I mean, we've looked at these things for years, and basically all of these systems have had a feature like this. And basically, if you want to go upgrade the RAM, you just swivel the fan out of the way, and now you can get to the RAM. Except you can't get directly at the RAM in this system because there's actually a little thermal transfer, like blanket pad thing that's on top of the RAM. So you have to actually remove that or pull that out of the way, and then you can get to the RAM. Something that you will know is the fact that we did upgrade this to a total of 64 gigs of RAM. We are using the G.Skill DDR4 3200 DIMMs, which I guess, you know, just work well in most of these tiny mini micros things. We'll actually have an affiliate link in the description if you just wanted to see what we used. That way you know what to look for. Now, on the CPU side, there are two things I want to cover real quick. First, this is an AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 4750GE. Hopefully I said that right, but one of the things that you are going to notice in the overall cooling solution on this is the fact that we do get a copper heatsink, and I actually really like HP's thermal design here. It's a really nice copper heatsink, and the fact that we don't have like an extra shroud because the shroud is all integrated with the copper heatsink. I actually really like what HP's doing here. And something that I know a lot of folks are going to want to know is like, is this PSB locked? Like, is this Ryzen CPU PSB locked like we saw Lenovo with the M75Q Gen 2 Tiny, and we had a whole video on that. That is definitely, you know, Lenovo is definitely locking these Ryzen Pro systems to their systems. Is HP doing the same thing? Well, a couple things here. One, we went through the BIOS. We didn't see AMD PSB enabled in it. And so what we actually did was we got other systems, and specifically we got two ASUS systems and 1 GB system. This is one of the ASUS systems right here. And we're just using that to validate the fact that we can use the processors from some of these, you know, corporate desktop PCs in other motherboards, because if they were vendor locked, we would not be able to use it in this. And what we basically found, which is awesome, is the fact that HP is not using that, or at least on this particular system is not using AMD PSB, which means that this Ryzen Pro CPU is not vendor locked. Now, again, the G8 version we don't have, so we don't know about the status of that, but for the G6, at least the one sample that we have, it is not vendor locked, which is awesome. It means you can go upgrade, and you can also pull this CPU out and put it into other systems. I would still be a little bit wary in case there's like some kind of special order that HP did for a customer, but overall, I think, you know, we might be okay in this system. Now, below that, we have the 2.5-inch carrier. And frankly, the 2.5-inch carrier in this one is not my favorite, and not even close to being my favorite. The reason for that is pretty simple. It's pretty clunky to actually get a drive in here. And then the other thing is it uses the little cable, and it's actually quite hard to remove. Whereas like Dell and Lenovo have these like super simple plastic, you know, just pull them out versions. This thing's like metal, there's like screws in it, and it's just a total pain to get in. But one of the reasons for that is that on the bottom of the 2.5-inch one, there's actually another little fan. And the reason there's a little fan is so that you can have better cooling on the M.2 SSDs. And this is the other major feature that is going to separate this HP system from the Lenovo M75Q Gen 2 Tiny, which is the fact that we get a total of 2 M.2 slots for NVMe SSDs. So here we have the Western Digital SN, I think 730, which is a 256 gig SSD that's in here, which is standard. And we're really using that more as an OS drive. But then the other thing you can do is put another drive in here. And in this case, we're actually using a 1 terabyte drive, specifically the HP EX900 Plus. And basically that gives us a boot drive plus a data drive, which is absolutely awesome in a little system like this. We also get a Wi-Fi 6 module, which is great to go along with the fact that we do have 1 gig Ethernet on the rear I/O. One other small feature you're gonna see on this is this white little part right here, and this is actually the connector. If you do have a DGPU, this is basically your PCIe connector that's in the system. It is not a standard PCIe slot. Okay, let's talk about performance and power consumption. So when we talk about this system right here, this I think only had the Ryzen 4000 series. And frankly, the Ryzen 4000 series is a huge upgrade versus the generations prior. And so it's definitely something that, I really like, and I would definitely spend a little bit more money for the 4000 series versus like a 2000 series product or something older. This is definitely a good upgrade. You're gonna see in the performance numbers, this is really a generational shift, and I definitely like it a lot. The one thing I will note though is just the fact that when you move to the 5000 series, that's when we get the Zen 3, so that therefore in AMD world, we get a pretty huge performance uplift and performance per core and clock uplift. And because of that, I do really like the Ryzen 5000 series, and that's why we have two of the 805 G8s on order. We just still can't get them. Okay, now in terms of power consumption, at idle, we saw about 12 watts, and it varies a little bit. And also just remember that as these small fans get, gunked up, you're gonna start seeing they spin more. And when they spin more, your idle power consumption is gonna go up. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And also based on your configuration, these numbers are gonna change a little bit, right? Now at idle, while we're at 12 watts, when we got up to, under load, we were able to get to around 55-ish watts maximum. We really couldn't push much past there, but we are using a 35 watt TDP CPU. So we thought this was actually a pretty high number, but it was definitely something that is nowhere near what some of the Intel systems are putting out these days with 35 watt TDP CPUs. There's definitely a huge difference between the AMD and Intel versions in this like 1 liter form factor. You can definitely tell the difference in terms of power. Now, of course, you can also go higher if you're plugging in a bunch of high power USB devices. So there is a pretty wide range here, but that just kind of gives you some idea of what we're looking at. Now, let's talk really briefly about why I said that HP is absolutely dastardly, and especially with our ordering right now, the G8 versions of these systems. So I actually placed 2 orders for the 805 G8 Mini back in, I think like January. So January 2nd and I think January 10th. And the first one I did, I think I didn't have a DGPU, but I had a 65 watt CPU. And then the second one, I said, yeah, let's do a DGPU. Let's get that NVIDIA 1660 Ti. Let's go do this one up and see like how cool we can get it. And so the coupons changed a little bit. I managed to get a decent deal, and I said, let's just go look at it because I really like the Ryzen 5000 series. And when I ordered in early January, the ship dates for those were basically in that mid to late or the last third of January. And so basically I thought, hey, it's gonna be like 2-3 weeks for these things to get built and shipped, but they're custom, sure, whatever. Now, when I made that order, HP actually did charge me. So they took my funds at the time of order. And I was expecting that I would get something in a couple weeks. But then early February, I got a note from HP's order support asking, hey, on my HP EliteDesk 405 G8 Mini, like if I don't want the FlexIO module. And I was like, okay, well, first off, if it's just a 2.5 gig Ethernet thing, and if you're gonna cancel it if you don't ship that, then sure, I do want the units even without that, even though I really want that feature. Sure, okay, cool, but also, hey, I ordered an 805 G8, shouldn't that be an 805, not a 405? And they did confirm the fact that, yeah, I did order 805s, not 405s, and so cool. I thought, okay, that was the blocker. That is the reason that they're not getting built. And so we're gonna say, go ahead and they'll get built and then I'll have them. And that's not what happened. Instead, what basically happened was that one of the systems has an ETA of like sometime in March now, and the other one have no clue. And just frankly, to me, the one thing I don't like about this is the fact that HP definitely knows the fact that they cannot build the systems because of whatever reason, whether they don't want to, whether there's supply constraint, whatever the reason, they are not building my system. And what makes me a little bit more annoyed than other situations is really just the fact that when I'm recording this video is actually in February, after when we got that email early, February about like, hey, can we go do that change? I actually went on the configurator at the time, did the exact same configurations and saw what my ship date was, because I figured like, hey, how long is it gonna take to get it? And I was still gonna get it in February, but that's not happening. So HP took my money, they knew they can't build a system, and they're continuing to sell these systems with estimated ship dates that they know they cannot make, and I do not like that. So shame on HP for taking people's money when they absolutely know they cannot deliver. I think this is absolutely dastardly. HP should not be doing it, but I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Hey, it's me from the future again. Just as a quick note, I did mention earlier the fact that we did get the 805G8. Finally, we got one of the two. We actually got the second one that was ordered, I think, on January 10th. It arrived in March. And so it definitely was way later than the date. And by the way, when we actually did the piece where we looked at saying like, hey, let's go order, what's the lead time, I guess, in February, I actually ordered a second one in February just to make sure that, like, it said, okay, if you order today, you'll get it in February. That one, of course, hasn't been made either. And so I think that the key thing is the one that we ordered January 2nd never arrived. The one that ordered January 10th finally has arrived. The one that we ordered in February didn't arrive. And so I think that the overall thing is still true where, these things, you have absolutely no idea when the heck you're gonna actually get them. But on the other hand, we're getting things like we got the 2.5 gig NIC here that HP's order supports that we couldn't get. And I have no idea what the heck is going on at HP, but overall my comment still stands. I think it's just terrible and dastardly, the fact that they actually go and they take your money and they don't get you units on time or even remotely on time. So if it's delayed a week, a couple days, sure, but if it's over a month, I mean, these products only last maybe 12 to 16 months in the market while they're the newest generation. So taking your money and being over a month late definitely means that you're basically losing a tenth or something like that of an entire generation. That's insane. Okay, now back to the present. But on a lighter note, this is definitely the best system that you can get in terms of an AMD Ryzen or 1 liter PC these days. I definitely think that this is the best, at least until we see the Alder systems come out. I think, or we can maybe get a G8 system or an 805 G8 system. I think this is the best system that you can get. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Unlike Lenovo, that actually says it's an M75Q Gen 2 Tiny, that one is definitely below the M90Q Gen 2 Tiny. And so when you look at Lenovo, they actually say, well, first, we're not going to give the second M.2 slot, and then second, we're going to do PSB locking. This one does not have PSB locking, and it also has the second M.2 slot because HP puts us on par with its top-end Intel offerings. But of course, that kind of brings us to the sad state of affairs, where if you do want a AMD Ryzen 5000 series system in these 1 liter PCs, well, basically Dell doesn't make them. HP, well, you can't buy them because they won't actually make it for you, even though they allegedly sell them. And then Lenovo PSB locks and considers it an inferior system. I don't know, guys, it's just rough times. So what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be looking at some of the other mini PCs in the market that are AMD based because, well, I read the comments and this is just a horrible situation by the big 3 PC vendors. But by closing this, I just wanna say, first off, thank you to Jose for actually getting this unit to us, getting that 1 gig Ethernet thing and learning about FlexIO V2. That was definitely something that was totally worth it and that was awesome. So thank you, Jose, if you're watching this. Again, thank you. And hey, if you're watching this and you did like this video, well, why don't you give it a like, click subscribe, turn on notifications so you can see whenever we come out with great new videos. As always, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.